Hi, Jeremy here, Modern Vitality. In today's video, we'll be exploring how to heal your body from a complex chronic health condition and how to keep your health, especially with respect to the 5 seasons. 5 seasons, yeah, that's right. Most people understand 4 seasons, but when you start looking at natural medicine, especially Eastern medicine, you can see there's actually a 5th season that you need to be aware of. And why is any of this important? Well, because when we stop looking at the human body in a reductionist way, where we just see you as a bunch of parts or numbers on a lab report or whatever else, and instead we look at our human experience as connected to nature, not separate from it, then we have to understand the forces within nature that influence our body. And these forces are going to have leverage on our healing, meaning there are times of the year when it's going to be easier to heal and recover, right? There are times of the year when certain therapies are going to be a better idea than others. There are times of year when certain therapies are going to actually be harder for you and you won't get as much progress. You can even hurt yourself if you're doing the wrong types of things. So when we talk about living seasonally, this also applies to the actual herbs, supplements, practices, all the different things you're doing. You want to understand this. And then probably the most important thing is to understand which parts of the year are going to be the hardest for you, given your condition. And if you start to heal and you start to get your life back and you start to get better, you want to know which parts of the year are going to be the test phases, right? So you can make sure that you really are solidifying and keeping your progress. So we're going to unpack a lot of information. This one's going to be kind of dense. You may want to have your little notebook, right? Maybe you've started a notebook to follow some of our videos with. If you're taking notes, this would be a great time to get your notebook out because this one's going to be full of info. All right, let's get started. So I think the first thing we need to do is address the elephant in the room here. 5 seasons, right? The 5th season. So everybody, hopefully, is familiar with the basic 4 seasons, right? We have spring, summer, autumn or fall, and winter, right? Those are the 4. Everybody learns, right? I hope you learned this in school. I did. I know they're changing a lot of the curriculums now, but hopefully they haven't taken that out. So we're going to add to that. And what I want to share with you is something that I've taken from my training in Eastern medicine and this understanding of the 5 seasons. Now there is a 5th season. And what's really interesting with this is that it's not a season in the sense of spring or summer. It's the in-between. It's the transition phases. So in between every season, from spring to summer, there's about a 2-week transition, right? And then from summer to fall, there's about a 2-week transition. Fall to winter, winter to spring, and we go around and around the cycle. And you want to understand these transition points are a special time. A very special time. So in Japanese, they call it the doyo, right? But basically it comes from this whole Eastern medicine idea where we have 5 phases or 5 elements, right? So we've got water, wood, fire, right? We've got earth and we've got metal. And each one of those phases or elements goes with a different time of year. So I'm gonna lay down all these correlations for you. I think I can do this pretty quickly, and we'll go into detail around how you can actually use this once you have a baseline understanding of how all this stuff fits together. So our water element has to do with wintertime, and what's going on in the wintertime is kind of more of a hibernation, right? Now the energetics that go with wintertime is this down and in type of energy, meaning you start to get a sense of the body. I know I've spoken about this in other videos, but you start to get a sense of the body and also our own spirit and our own kind of personal expression in the world. And we have these different movements and dynamics throughout the year and throughout our lives. And one of them is down and in, which has to do with accumulating and drawing in energy. And when you think of the bear hibernating in a cave, right, during wintertime, it's that kind of down and in energy. It's a lot different than its opposite, right? Winter's at the bottom, we got summer, which is the opposite, which is like up and out and everybody's awake and running around and more expansive, right? So we'll start with winter. That's a water element. And as we move out of winter, and I'm going to skip the transition phase for now, but as we move out of winter, we go to spring, right? And now spring is when we have this upward thrust of energy, right? We're going up. All the plants are growing up, right? All the saved nutrition that's been in the seeds or the roots or whatever all year in the wintertime is now coming up for springtime, and it's expressing, starting to grow, right? We're getting this upward push. And then when we hit summer, and that goes with wood, right? And then when we hit summer, we're into the fire phase, right? Obviously, this is kind of water and fire are the extremes, right? Winter and summer. So now we have this manifestation of upward and outward, right? We're all the way there. And then when we go into autumn is when we start to change and we start to go down. And as we're going down, the downward movement is going to lead us back to winter, and we've gone around a cycle, right? Autumn has to do with the metal element, which has a lot to do with the lungs. And oftentimes people start getting sick. It's cold and flu season and that kind of thing in the autumn, which is pretty interesting. Now, what you want to understand with this is if you can get the hang of this kind of cycle, right? So Wintertime is down and in. And then as we progressively get towards summer's upward and outward, right? We have to go up through the spring, and then we have to go express the summer, and then we have to go down in the autumn to get back to winter. And that's the loop, and that's the cycle. Now, the same thing happens on a daily basis, right? Because we have like midnight and noon, which would be the same thing as winter and summer, right? The winter solstice, the summer solstice for the year marks time. In a fractal way, we can mark the day that same way, where we have noon and midnight, right? It's the same kind of idea, but we're looking at a larger timeline. So you can take your circadian rhythm, and I know I've spoken about this before, and you can also look at the annual rhythm and how your body is moving through these same phases on just longer timelines, longer wavelengths. And it's good to actually have a system. When you start to look at your health, you have systems where there are cycles within cycles. And that creates a bit of redundancy and a bit of protection for the system to have these different cycles moving in a larger cycle, right? So this is a bit beyond this video, but the way these things fit together is quite elegant and beautiful. And then we can see it reflected in reality. And it's some of the theory that informs actually getting results. So when people ask, well, how are you helping people get over these complex chronic conditions? It's not magic in the sense that I just conjure up some herbs from the ether or something like that. The magic is having the architecture and the understanding of cosmic cycles, daily cycles, and also things like the weather, right? The heat or cold, the moisture or dryness, the windiness, right? That's going on outside the system, the human body system, how that influences things, and understanding how that fits in with how our internal system is mirroring back this larger natural macrocosm, right, within the microcosm. There are all these sayings like as above, so below, and you start looking at the big world, and it does get reflected. It's really quite interesting. So we need to be aware of this. When you're working on a complex chronic health condition, for example, fibromyalgia or Lyme disease, right, or mold exposure, that's another big one, or any of these kind of recalcitrant, hidden pathogen type conditions like Epstein-Barr virus or Candida. Now we have long haulers too, right? Which is another one of these hidden pathogen conditions where there's something lingering around. Chronic fatigue syndrome often has this as a component, even though most people don't know about it. But that's typically what's at one of the roots of that is you have some kind of hidden pathogen or a virus or something that's lingering, or mold. Adrenal fatigue, similar type of thing. A lot of our overreactive, like mast cell activation syndrome, a lot of these things have at the root, and especially autoimmune conditions. I can't believe I didn't say that one already. Autoimmune conditions too have at the root, oftentimes there's some lingering hidden pathogen component, right? Now, how your body handles these pathogens can change throughout the year. Isn't that interesting? So when we are in wintertime, we don't always have the same resources available to have an immune expression, right, as the summertime. And we know this from Western science now, is like, oh, vitamin D, you got to get vitamin D. It's so important. It's like a miracle. Yeah, it is. But you know what? That energy comes from a byproduct of sun exposure, right? And yes, vitamin D is a hormone in the body, and it has an immune function. It helps to keep us healthy and happy, and it does all sorts of wonderful functions, right? And one of them is the strong immune component. But when you get out in the sun, you're not only getting the sunshine, you're also kind of surfing on this energy of upward and outward expansion, which is the same energy your immune system drives off of. Now I'm going to break, I know I'm all over the place here, but I swear there is like a real method behind the madness. If you have ever walked outside and sneezed, then you know what I'm talking about. All right. And this is a phenomenon that a lot of people have. If I remember being a kid, even my mother knew this, and she didn't know Eastern medicine or anything like that. But you know, you start to sneeze and it kind of gets stuck. And then she would say like, oh, look up at a light or go outside in the sun. And you do that. And all of a sudden the sneeze comes out. You know, I don't know if you ever had that experience where you're trying to sneeze and you're like, and you just pull this like funny face for, and everybody knows what, you know, that you've got one stuck in there, right? So you look at a light and it helps a lot of times. Well, what's going on? Those photons are giving us energy, right? We're getting a little bit, a microcosm of sun energy, which is summer energy. You get a little bit of that and your immune system can work with that. And the immune system loves this upward and outward energy that goes with this kind of solar energy, right? This summer energy, that upward and outward energy. It's expansive. That's how we push out and expel pathogens. This is why sweating is so helpful for pathogens, because you get this upward and outward push, right? You create more pressure in your body than the little bugs can handle, and they can't get in. It's really quite interesting. When we start looking at some of the herbs we use, especially in stage 1, immune system, these herbs tend to have a diaphoretic property, which means they help make you sweat. Now, how do they do that? Well, a lot of these herbs actually can change the pressure in the surface capillaries of your of your blood vessels. Isn't that cool? They can create a higher pressure there so that you get more resistance to things coming in and an easier ability to start to push out at your surface, at your exterior. It's a way to protect your boundaries. But we get that from the sun energy. We get that from the summertime, the upward and outward, just full on expression and expansion, right? It's very, very interesting. Your body's going to have an easier time healing and fighting off pathogens, whether they're internal or they're externally trying to come in, which they're basically always trying to come in from the outside, right? Have an easier time in the actual summer, or if you can replicate summer conditions. Some of the ways we replicate summer conditions, like I already said, sweating, like going in saunas, creating heat in your body through various types of breathing exercises and things like that. This is all stuff that we work on within Modern Vitality, right? These are part of our tools, but they have to be used strategically when appropriate. And you need to learn how to do that. So there are certain herbs, again, diaphoretics, things like that. And you can see that your body already does this because a sneeze is one of these upward and outward. It's very obvious, right? The directionality of a sneeze, because you're literally blowing snot up and out of your body in an attempt to get rid of any kind of early pathogens that are coming into the nasal cavity. It's just fascinating. It's really, actually, as an aside, it's really cool how our body works because there are so many pieces in place. Like the way our nasal cavities work, it creates a vortex. So when air comes in, when you breathe through your nose, right, there are little things called turbines or little protrusions inside the nasal cavity, and that starts to spiral the air so that your air is spiraling through. And what that does is it creates basically a centrifuge. So any little particles, including dust and pathogens and things like that, they tend to go out, right, of the spiral. They tend to whip out. And what that does is then that hits them into the mucus that's on the walls of the nasal cavity, right? So the mucus can grab them so they don't go down into the lungs. This is one of the reasons why nasal breathing is so important and why a lot of people are going on about that now. Nasal breathing is so healthy. Well, that's one of the reasons why. Right? In mouth breathing, you don't get that same kind of spiraling effect, right? So all these pathogens, they build up in the mucus because of your spiraling turbines in your nose, and then you can sneeze them out, right? So it's like they come in a little bit, you catch them, and then you blow them out with a sneeze. That's what's going on there. We're really using the upward and outward expansive force of summertime energy. And you can conjure this during other times of the year if you need to balance yourself, right? When we go into fall, into autumn, that's when that kind of energy is now changing. We don't have so much of the upward and outward energy of the summer because that's just, we're starting to get shorter days, less sun exposure, right? But I do think there's actually something kind of behind the scenes there. There's like an invisible force. It's just an invisible feeling that you get as the days start to get a little bit shorter, as summertime kind of fades away and you start to enter fall or autumn. And that's when we start to become a little more down and in with our energy, which means it's a little bit easier for pathogens to come in, right? We don't have that push, that resistance. Now, this is on a healthy physiology, right? If you've got Lyme disease or fibromyalgia or anything like that, you're already going to be coloring outside the lines a little bit in terms of how your body's moving with these forces and actually rebalancing you and getting you, just like getting somebody back to their circadian rhythm. The same thing is trying to get your body back to an annual rhythm where you're able to expand during summertime, sweat appropriately, right? And then when you get to autumn and winter, you're able to maintain your blood circulation and stay warm and not get so cold. So it gets really quite interesting because the downward and compression type forces of summer changing to fall, changing to autumn, right? Depending on where you're from, you might say that differently, that's an opportunity for, I'm just going to say things, right? Pathogens, biofilms, phlegm. What we would term in Eastern medicine as a shorthand catch-all for this is dampness, which basically just means like funky, wet, turbid, fluidy things like snot and stuff that you don't want in your body, right? Biofilms is a big one, mucoid type substances. Like you want to have healthy fluids, but you don't want to be totally dried out, but having this dampness where you get a thick biofilm coating on your tongue, and this is also happening inside your body, right? That's a problem. And when you shift from summer to autumn, that's a really good opportunity for that dampness to kind of start to coalesce and come into your body, which then sets you up for wintertime of not having a clean internal state to kind of retreat to, right? That's our recharge time. So imagine that bear going in the cave, right? Imagine if that bear gets a bunch of parasites or something in summertime and then doesn't handle them and then goes into wintertime and goes to hibernate. And now all that nutrition that the bear built up that was supposed to feed the bear throughout the winter is now being gobbled up by, I don't know, tapeworms or whatever, right? These things are in there. They're sapping the resources. What should be a restorative time is now it's compromised, right? It's starting to erode. Or likewise, if you ever kept vegetables, right? Some of my friends are farmers, and some of the people I work with are farmers too. Some of our people that come through our program, and they have a really keen sense of nature in some of these annual cycles. And sometimes it's a big thing to connect the dots between what you know from farming and what's the same thing going on in your body, right? So if we're going to store root vegetables, like you have a root cellar, maybe you're going to keep onions over the winter time. You don't want to put those onions in there and just have a bunch of mold and stuff growing on them, because over time they're just condensed in there and they're just waiting, and that mold is just going to be eating them more and rotting them and making it worse, right? So you got to, before you go internal for the wintertime to do your kind of deeper storage stuff, your more yin type of process, you want to try to make sure that you're cleaning out all this funk that's constantly trying to break down your body. And that's another thing I talk about a lot is mold and bacteria and these kinds of things. They're not trying to kill you because they're your enemy, right? That's their job, is to constantly press on every living thing and say, hey, are you ready to be turned back into soil yet? Right? Should I decompose you? Should I do that now? Right? All these fungi and things, the mold spores coming in, that's what they're trying to do. So you need to always be pushing back and say, hey, no, I'm a vital living creature. And that's part of your immune system's job, is to go, get out. Not today, right? You're going to break us down one day. One day I will be soil, but it is not today. Beat it, right? So that's what needs to happen as we transition from summer into autumn. We need to make sure that we're maintaining our vitality and that we're not taking in the dampness, especially if you live in a place where late summer starts to get real humid. They talk about that, like the dog days of summer. It's like the heat and the humidity. It's very damp externally, and we start to pick that up. We start to get that more inside. So we need to make sure that we're pushing back on that, so that when we get to wintertime, we can actually rest and recharge and kind of go dark for a little bit and not have pathogens just hollowing us out the whole winter, right? Because then when you go back to spring to complete your cycle and start to come up again, you're not going to have that vitality because you didn't get your battery charged up during the winter like you should have. So things to think about here. I gave you the 4-season rundown. Now I'm going to give you that 5th season in between, right? It's a transition. And really I'm focusing in this video on that transition from summer to autumn. But it's there from autumn to winter. It's there from winter to spring. It's there from spring to summer. It's at every single transition point. And this is when we're a little bit, the body's kind of a little bit, it's a transition, right? So the body's kind of a little bit half in one world, half in the next, right? I'm half in summer mode, I'm half in autumn mode. And once you're keen to this and savvy to this, you'll start to feel the weather. If you've ever lived in a place where in between seasons like that, it's not quite spring, it's not quite summer, right? Or it's not quite fall, it's not quite winter. And you'll look around, you'll walk around, you're trying to pick out clothes to wear, or you're talking to your friends or family, and you say, I wish the weather would just make up its mind. What is going on here? You're probably in one of those little 2-week plus or minus kind of transition phases. Now, those are very important. You don't want to be getting sick there. That's a really good opportunity to make sure that you're doing the right kinds of things to support that energy transition, right? So what are those right kind of things? Well, I've already explained from summer to fall, right? You don't want to be locking in and trapping in pathogens. So that's why, you may have different types of herbs and foods you eat and practices like breath work and things like that, where you're actively pumping your immune system up to start to push these things out. Now, of course, I'm not giving you medical advice, but I am going to give you the themes, right, of how this kind of works and how these energetics work. So you want to be thinking about upward and outward movement, a lot of breaking a sweat, right? Diaphoresis, which means breaking a sweat. Look at some of the foods that are really common, especially as we get into autumn, right? What does everybody like during autumn time? Pumpkin spice, right? It's all those great like cinnamon and nutmeg and all those kinds of things where you have some warming action. These are warming spices. And why is that important? Because we're starting to cool down and we're starting to head towards winter, right? It's very important. So look at some of the cultural stuff, not only in Eastern cultures, which is where I've studied a lot of that, but also take a look at Western cultures and old world European cultures, right? If you are from any kind of old world country, or you have friends or family who are still kind of connected to the older traditions. And what I mean by that is, there's no easy way to say this, but Western culture has been kind of hijacked and taken over. If you're not aware of that, then we've got bigger problems. So I'm just going to speak freely about this. But since about the 50s, it was all this marketing of better living through chemistry. And that's where a lot of our separation from nature kind of really officially took a hold. And our culture's never been the same ever since. I say our culture because I'm a product of this too. And for me to get where I am even is taking a lot of deconditioning and a lot of cleaning out my own biases and lenses that I picked up from this culture. right? It's important that you deprogram yourself sometimes. And fortunately, what we do have is there's still a connection to the old world in some places where people still understand seasonal rhythms, right? Eating with the seasons, and not only eating with the seasons, but also how to use different herbs seasonally to help support the natural ebb and flow of our body's energy. So we want to understand this. And the big thing here, the big trap is to go through this process, right? And like feel good in the summertime and then get to the wintertime and be like miserable again and go, what happened? Right? Well, what happened was probably that transition didn't get handled right. So what you don't want to do, if you're trying to live with this kind of idea in mind and you want to maintain your health, or you're trying to dig yourself out of a complex chronic health condition, what you don't want to do is cause further problems for yourself, right? If you find yourself in a hole, the first step is to stop digging. Don't make things worse, right? Take your foot off the brake before you start hitting the gas. And when you start transitioning from summer to autumn, try not to eat a bunch of garbage, right? Try not to put more, like in the summertime, you may find you have a little more dietary flexibility. If you're to have ice cream or something that maybe is kind of damp and cold and challenges you during the summertime, you have enough kind of yang and vitality built up from the baseline of just the simple fact that it's summertime, right? So you're getting that push to offset some of that. You'll probably find you can't get away with things like that so easily as we switch to fall. And it gets really tricky now because this isn't old world so much, but nowadays the holidays is just garbage food. It's a month of just eating trash, right? Which is fun to see people and to, share all the little holiday treats and everything. But if you want to preserve your health, this may be one of those places where you have to draw a line in the sand and say, I don't really want to eat a lot of this because it's only going to set me up for being sick on Christmas, basically, or during the holidays. And that's one of the reasons too why we have this New Year's resolution time where everybody's just eating trash for a month at the wrong time of year, right? It's the wrong time of year to be eating all these damp, like sugary things. It's just we don't have that push from the sun. It's wintertime. And then you go, okay, well, New Year's resolution, right? I want to feel better and all that. Well, you could set yourself up for success for your New Year's resolution just by changing your habits and eat like it's summer when it's summer, right? And when it's winter, go back to winter foods. And winter foods would be something more nourishing and kind of clean, like soups and stews and these kinds of things. And usually there's some warming spices in there. And I know some traditions also will use cooling foods, right? Like daikon radish. And that's okay. You should be mixing things up. But when you zoom out and look at what you're eating, is it seasonally appropriate? Right? Or is it like I'm trying to eat a bunch of ice cream in the winter? Because that's going to be tough. You don't have the same advantage. You don't have the same leverage. So this is one of the reasons why when I work with people, especially with complex chronic health conditions, and they start to get better, I get really excited, of course. I love the wins. Like in our group, people share their wins. It lights me up. I see that stuff every day. I open my phone, I look in our chat group. There's somebody with a win, some kind of symptom that they've finally overcome, or they're getting some hope because they're starting to feel stronger in different ways. They're getting their life back. Fantastic. I love it. And I want to see those wins sustain, right? Not just for the next week or two, but also throughout a whole annual cycle. When people get stronger and then they can stay strong through the upward energetics of spring, the full expression of summer, and then here comes, and I'm kind of emphasizing this because this is the trickier part for most people with complex chronic health conditions. It's that transition from summer all the way down to like winter solstice, right? That's a tricky one. So if people can maintain their health through that phase, right, and come out the other side, get into springtime, summertime, and they're still future focused and making travel plans and having fun, that is a really, really good sign in terms of long-term prognosis. That's a really good sign. So what does that mean if somebody gets better and when winter comes, they feel like they're backsliding or regressing? Does that mean that they're doomed, right? No, it just means we need to take a longer term view and go, okay, for this year, right, this circadian rhythm stretched out to an annual rhythm, right? This annual rhythm, you got a lot of progress in one part and then you backslid here. And we know that we zoom out and we can see the trigger is that downward and inward probably drew in more pathogenic activity. It makes the job a little harder for your immune system. We need to be able to step that up because next year is going to roll around. The same thing's going to happen. And where will you be at that point, right? Will you now have a more resilient system that can handle that? So we just have to expand our timeline, right? Because that's another one. It can be really frustrating if people don't understand these longer term movements and fluctuations, and we're stuck in like a 2-week window of life, and we say, oh, I got these wins here. And like, here's another thing too. It's really kind of funny because everybody does this in our group, especially. We've got people going through a process, right? Immune system, digestive, neuroadrenal, blood circulation. And eventually one of these stages is going to be really profound for people, because we find that's where your major blockages are. And as we start to unblock that, people get all these wins, right? Oh, I've got all this energy again, right? I'm actually not in pain anymore. And I'm kind of freaked out because I'm used to being in pain. I feel so good. I'm almost weirded out, right? Which is interesting. But I get people a lot of times, they say, hey, I've had these wins. I didn't want to share them in the group. I wanted to wait like a month, because I didn't want to jinx myself. I didn't want to share it and get too excited and then lose my progress or something. We don't have to be afraid about that, because what's really going to happen is, even if you get a win and it only lasts a month and you backslide, or 3 months and you backslide, it's really because we need to zoom out and not look at this 2-week or 1 month period of time as the be all end all. We need to look for sustained wins. And when we see people making progress year after year, you can start to measure your winters, which would be quite interesting, right? To start looking at that. Okay, the last 3 winters were miserable, right? I was sick, fatigued. Remember the holidays? They were horrible. And now this winter wasn't great, but I could see that I was actually, there was one lady in our group who actually said, I'm excited for Christmas again for the first time in a long time, right? So you can see now she's making it on an annual basis. She's making progress. Sometimes we have to take a long-term view with this. So I share this kind of thinking to help you connect the dots, right? Between our circadian rhythm, which we know is important, and scientists are all over that, and proving all these things that we've known from Eastern medicine for, 3, 5 something thousand years. But now we also have to expand and look at larger rhythms. We know there's a monthly rhythm. We know there's a seasonal rhythm. We know there's an annual rhythm, right? So we need to pay attention to this, because we may be marking our progress, and it's easy to get discouraged and feel like, well, I had this great start and then my progress just wound down. Well, also, what was happening? What was the time of year like? It's really important to get context, so that you don't feel like you're just fighting this invisible enemy that is complex chronic illness, or you feel like your body's fighting itself, like you're just inflamed for no reason, when actually one of the major factors could be timing and what's going on in that realm. And also, if you let yourself experience those seasons, or do you put yourself in a climate controlled box so that every day it's 70 degrees Fahrenheit, right? No matter what, and your body never gets that variation, and you're always under artificial lights, and you never get to be exposed to what's the sky doing near you, right? Is your body in some kind of artificial stasis where there's no season? What's going on there? So there's a lot to consider here. The main reason I want to share this, though, is so that you can take a longer view and know where you are in terms of your healing process, but also when you are in terms of the time of year. And if you're tracking this stuff, if you're paying attention to this stuff, then you're going to want to know that you're comparing your annual. It's kind of like business people, right? They're like looking at, okay, first quarter last year compared to first quarter this year, right? They're looking at their quarterly comparisons, right? Year on year. It's kind of like that. You can start looking at your spring health last year, your spring health the year before, right? Your spring health this year, your summer health last year, your summer health this year. You can start to look at your different phases of life within those seasons. And then the other thing about this is to try to really be careful around those transition points. When the weather's getting wacky and weird, I would kind of recommend that you err on the side of overprotection from the elements. So if you're doing, from spring to summer and the weather's getting wild and you're trying to get dressed, put a scarf on, right? Wear a hoodie. Just wear like one extra layer than what you think, because you're better off staying a little bit more warm than getting kind of a little bit more exposed to some of that transition energy in the weather, because it just starts to get weird. And when the weather's going back and forth like that, right, you get these winds, right? A lot of times it's like the wind of change coming in, because you got hot and cold fronts meeting, and that creates the pressure changes. Now we got wind coming through, and what that's going to be doing is blowing in new pathogens from new places, right? So just be ready for that. It's an exposure. So you need to be ready. You need to be armed. You need to take care of your immune system. You need to do the things that your body wants so that you can be healthy. We have a group. I know I mentioned it. If you're struggling with a complex chronic health condition, you might want to apply for membership here. Why go through this by yourself, right? There's all kinds of wonderful people from all over the world in various time zones, right? But we're all moving through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. We're all doing it together. Everybody's in various points on their healing journey, and you can be a fly on the wall, right? Or you can be a little more vocal if you want. You can ask me anything you want in there. You can observe what's going on. Some people are shy. They just want to kind of watch the process and get to know our culture and all that. We have people going through, I have a program, right? Of course, I've got a step-by-step program, and you can see people going through that, and you can ask any questions you want. You can watch us troubleshoot, right? Because sometimes people do have backslides, and you can see how we handle that in real time, which is great, so that we're not just grasping for some kind of random silver bullet or just having panic attacks because we lost our progress. But we have context, we have community, we have support, and probably most importantly, we have viable strategies so that you always have an option of, okay, consider this next. Here's your next step. It's very important to have that kind of clarity. So it's a lovely place to be. I keep the group kind of small. There might be a wait. I always say this because, I don't want people to get disappointed or frustrated when you submit your application. Even if it looks great, it still might be 2 weeks or 2 months before I can get you in, because I keep the group small and there's first come, first serve. So everybody gets the same fair opportunity. There may be people in front of you, but just know if your application does look really good, like you're going to fit in with our community here and what we do makes sense for the kinds of health challenges you're having, that you will be notified as soon as I can get you in. All right, I hope this video helps you. Remember, zoom out, see the bigger cycles, and then that'll help give you context so that you can make plans and strategize about what's coming next, right? We can't always predict the weather, but we can predict the energetic flux of the year, and we can try to attune our bodies to that so that we're not suffering needlessly. It's hard enough. Let's put this part in your favor. All right, let's get you feeling better. Cheers.